Okay, guys, I just got up here. I had to run up here. I'm really disappointed. No one told me about this, and I don't know how this escaped my attention. I can't believe none of you at all told me about this. No one told me about it. What the fuck? I'm not one for objectifying, okay? Jesus Christ, okay? How many times have I said, I want a woman that could crush my head in between her thighs. Any part of her body could crush my head. And I know the part that you're thinking of, and that's just one of several options. And Jesus fucking, look at her. What the hell? No one told me? I had to find out about this literally like 2 minutes ago. Amy told me about this, and I was just like Googling the internet. I was looking at like GameStop. It's more like stop, and look at her. What the hell?
So, first off, no, this video isn't going to be an Amelia Thirst video. Unless we're thirsting after good character development, then yes, I guess it is an Amelia Thirst video. I know what those of you who follow me on Twitter were expecting, but that's not what the subject of today's video is, despite the self-aware opening. And no, the title isn't clickbait. Today, we're going to talk about how Amelia Hughes from Infinity Train has possibly one of the best unspoken feminist arcs in children's media, and how it would be a shame if the series was never continued to show it. But in order to get to that, we need to understand some very fundamental aspects of the show, and even of Amelia herself. Now, this is your only warning that this video contains spoilers from Infinity Train books 1 and 3, as well as covers subject material on misogyny and other potentially triggering subjects such as suicide. If you haven't seen these parts of the show yet and don't want to be spoiled, or are sensitive to the aforementioned subjects, I heavily suggest turning the video off now. With that out of the way though, it's time for some backstory on who Amelia is and why she boarded the Infinity Train.
Perhaps you should spend less time with your toys, Amelia.
Toy, it's a crystal radio.
You can go first, fuck it, you can go twice. I'll make us some drinks if you'd like. But first I'll chuck out my phone so that you're all that's in sight.
Oh, very acceptable, but you're obviously a robot. Perhaps we can bridge the gap between our two civilizations. So, what do you think?
Teach me how to let go. Teach me how to let go. 'Cause I'm trying to learn all that could help me to be less concerned.
For those of you who don't know about Infinity Train and are still watching this video, first off, what are you doing? If this title and thumbnail piqued your interest enough to click on it, I'm sure that the show itself will too. A lot of people aren't fully aware that Infinity Train was picked up past the pilot that was posted on Cartoon Network's YouTube channel, but it was, and it's great. If serious subjects like women's rights and feminism are of interest to you, the show also tackles subjects of identity, narcissism, cults, death, and much, much more. Chances are, if you've heard of it secondhand, it's usually from a clip accompanied by, "How is this for kids?" which should signal to you really all that you need to know, honestly. If Christian moms hate it, it means it's some good stuff. Even if I personally think those posts are overkill and personally believe that kids can handle complex subject material and adults underestimate their ability to do so. The show is available to stream on HBO Max, but you're not here to listen to where and how to watch it, so consider the obligatory signal boost part of this video to be over. Infinity Train is an anthology series about a kidnapping therapy train. If you have a problem that overwhelms you, this train manifests wherever you are when you're alone and coaxes you into boarding. Once you're on, you can't get off until you work through your problems, your progress visibly being shown through glowing green numbers on your body. The higher your number is, the worse you're coping with your problems, and the further you are from getting off of the train. Amelia's reason for boarding is incredibly significant and essential to understanding her full story, motives, and true reason why she felt she had nothing to lose by getting on a mysterious train that appeared out of nowhere. Amelia was a young woman from England when she boarded the train after her fiancé, Alrick suddenly passed away. Unable to cope with the loss of her loved one, she traveled through the train and learned about how it functioned and discovered that it enabled endless possibilities that they previously thought impossible, even when it came to the revival of the dead. With newfound hope that her love could still be saved, she made her way to the engine, which is where the conductor, 1-1, resided. She begged and pleaded with the robot to bring him back and for him to make her a car where they could live out their days together, but he refused. Upset and driven to near madness by both rejection and grief, Amelia dethroned 1-1 and took over the train to fully realize her own desires. Unfortunately, bringing Alrick back proved to be a rather arduous task. Not only did she fail and create several half-finished train cars and sentient turtle people, but she also spent over 30 years of her life devoted to this vision. For 30 years, she did nothing but attempt to realize her vision and run from her shattered reality. This resulted in a once low number of 337 to climb up her neck and into the thousands. Her body and mind aged well into her late 60s as the years passed, wasting her youth chasing an impossible goal rather than accepting the truth. Her trauma then bled down, causing others who were on the train to become affected by her self-destructive behavior, while also inheriting their own trauma from her selfish actions. Her takeover of the train not only indirectly led to the gruesome death of a passenger, but was also the main component in forming a cult of traumatized children who worshipped her and formed their own meaning from her actions. In her stupor, she at one point also attempted to kill a passenger by the name of Tulip, but was only stopped once the young girl managed to put 1-1 back in control at the very last minute. Finally willing to attempt to move on after having been forced back into reality, Amelia works to fix the mistakes that she made. She wanders around the train, repairing and ejecting the failed cars that she made during her time as the conductor. And that's about it as of the end of Book 3. But you're probably wondering, how exactly is this somehow a feminist story like I so boldly stated in the title? A woman agonizing over a man and devoting her life to him doesn't exactly sound like anything groundbreaking. But that's where you would be wrong, because that isn't actually all there is to her story. It actually goes much, much deeper than that, but in order for us to understand, we need to go further back than Book 1. But how is that possible, you may ask? Simple. There's actually an episode that tells us the groundwork of Amelia's character and why she was driven to a manic break over Ulrich's death. It was much, much more complex than her just losing a loved one and being unable to cope with that. Introducing the episode from Book 1, The Perennial Child, The Past Car.
Look, I know it's hard, but it'll be good to go. We're all here for you.
Where's Amelia?
Gone forever?
At surface level, this episode only serves as a way to show both Tulip and the audience that the conductor isn't some heartless robot, but actually someone who is hurting others because of her own pain, and not necessarily because she's this irredeemable and heartless monster. It was an episode that was made to make us empathize with the antagonist, and also to be relatable for Tulip, who's fundamentally dealing with the same thing, in regards to being unable to cope with change. And while it does complete its purpose rather effectively, there's a lot more to analyze about the snippets of her life that we do end up seeing. We can actually find out a good portion of her life story just by picking up on subtext, and it's actually pretty amazing just how many hints the writers gave to us in the background. There's a lot of clues that you wouldn't think were clues, and this is something that Infinity Train as a show in general excels at. However, in order to give a greater context to everything that I'm going to be talking about, we first need to nail down the time period in which she lived before boarding the train. This is actually incredibly easy to do with near precise accuracy if you look in the correct places. The first thing to mention though is that both time outside and inside of the train is relative. This means that how long you're stuck on the train, you're also missing in that same amount of time in real life. This was actually confirmed by the creator, Owen Dennis, but also backed by in-show occurrences, like Jesse's little brother asking where he's been and then later asking him if he's leaving again when he goes back for Lake. It wouldn't really have the same impact or meaning if the train was in some sort of time loop or whatever. Kinda takes away from the whole point that people do spend long periods of time and even their whole lives dealing with and being unable to cope with certain issues. It is kind of dark, but I do really think that it's important for there to be this sort of melancholy and not entirely happy ending for these situations. It hardly ever ends up neat and tidy by the end in real life. Anyways, tidbit out of the way, we're not here to get distracted. Upon entering the first scene of Amelia's tape, we're greeted with a young Alrick and Amelia in elementary school. Not only can you tell it's the past by the scenery, but if you pay close attention, you can pinpoint the exact date to the day. If you look at Alrick's graded paper that's handed to him, the date reads 25/03/1963. Not only did this give us the year, but the way that the date was written also indicates that this wasn't taking place in the United States. The date is written with the day, month, and then year, whereas the United States is written as month, day, and then year. Now, obviously, you can tell this by a few other things, namely by Amelia and Alrick's very British accents and the architecture of their environment, but it is important to keep in mind regarding what I'm going to be covering later in this video. There's actually a few other places that we can see these dates, but going off of this alone, we can make a guess that Amelia was either born sometime between 1952 and 1958. This is because in England, children are in elementary school between the ages of 5 and 11. Now, because of how old they look here, I'm going to assume that Amelia most likely was born more towards 1952, since she looks like she's towards the end of elementary school here and about to move on to middle school if she hasn't already. That's in American education terms though. In terms of speaking from a United Kingdom standpoint, she would be in either year 6 or year 7. Year 6 being what we still consider to be the last year of elementary school here in the States, and year 7 being what we consider to be the first year of middle school. Later in the tape, we get to see both her and Alrick graduating from university. Now, while we don't actually get a day or month here, we still do get the year if you listen closely enough.
Congratulations, class of 76.
Wait, is that?
Did you hear it? I'll play it again in case you didn't.
Congratulations, class of 76.
The person who is giving the speech states that they're in the graduating class of 76, otherwise known as the year 1976. This means that here, both Amelia and Alrick are approximately between either 23 or 24 years of age, depending on the time of year that they graduated. We unfortunately don't get an approximate timescale beyond this point in the flashback, but we can still use other things in the background to determine the timeline of events. In the background of Amelia and Alrick's house, directly before Amelia proposes to Alrick, we can see him playing a game on the TV. The first home console, the Odyssey, was created in the year 1972. If you look at the shape of the system, it does look very reminiscent to that of what the actual Odyssey 2 system looks like. The Odyssey 2 was released in 1978 in Europe, so this means that this scene most likely took place a little over 2 years after their graduation, meaning that the year was probably around 1978 or 1979, give or take. This would put them in their late 20s, approximately between the ages of 26 and 27, which would fall in line since the average age to marry in the United Kingdom around that time was between the ages of 22 and 24. It isn't just the gaming system in this scene that indicates this time period, however. You can also look to the other technology in the room to confirm this, such as the computer in the background or Alrick's voice changer. Their computer actually looks astonishingly similar to that of an Apple II personal computer, which was first released in 1977, further solidifying the timeline that we've built so far. We also know, based on what Amelia says in Book 3, that she hasn't received a compliment in over 30 years, implying that she's been on the train for that amount of time and likely longer. But if we wanted an actual time frame for how long Amelia was on the train, we do have an actual number. In the Infinity Train short, The Snow Car, one exclaims that he was stuck in that particular car for exactly 33 years.
Now I remember. I was trapped here for 33 years!
This more or less confirms that Amelia was in control of the train for 33 years after she ripped him from the console, and possibly was on the train for longer, since she probably wandered around until she found the engine where 11 was. So we know from the last scene that we can estimate their ages in, they were around 27 years of age, and Amelia was probably on the train for a little longer than 33 years. If we were to go solely by those numbers, she would be approximately 60 years old in the current time. Which is almost right, but she's canonically in her late 60s at the time that this series takes place. If we were to go by 1952 being her birth year, canonically she would be 68 years old in 2020, so it can be implied that she probably boarded the train when she was in her mid to late 30s, meaning Alrick died shortly before her boarding. So the year that she would have boarded the train would have been sometime mid or late 1980s. If we wanted to have an estimation of the year and age that she boarded the train, it was probably around 1986, meaning she was 34 or 35. So she probably had a good 7 to 9 years with Alrick after graduating university before he passed away. And it could potentially be a few years earlier as well. The later half of the timeline gets kind of messy, but this is more or less the most coherent time frame that you can come up with given the information that we're shown. Now, as someone who hates math, I want to say that yes, these mental gymnastics are incredibly important to Amelia's arc. Why? The years in which she was alive on Earth are very important to the history of women's rights, especially women's rights in England. Let's look at how England treated women in Amelia's birth year, which we estimated was 1952. In the 1950s, teachers who were women would have just begun receiving equal pay when compared to their male colleagues, because of a law that was passed in her birth year. In 1954, equal pay for women in the civil service was also required by law. Before then, just like in the instance of teaching, it was legal to pay women less than men. This was because men were seen to be the breadwinners, and so women's income was seen as fun money for luxury spending. And in some cases, women didn't even get to keep their own money, their husbands would take it. In 1961, the birth control pill was introduced, but only married women were allowed access to it legally. It was only in 1967 that it was made available for all women with the National Health Service. Also in 1967, the Abortion Act of 1967 was enacted, legalizing abortions by registered practitioners and making abortion legal in all of Great Britain. And in 1970, finally, the Equal Pay Act of 1970 was passed, prohibiting any less favorable treatment between women and men in terms of pay and conditions of employment. In 1971, the first Women's Liberation March took place in London, and in 1975, it became illegal to discriminate against women in work, education, and training. There was of course much more that happened for women's rights beyond this in this time period and beyond, but I'm not a history YouTube channel, and I'm sure I wouldn't be able to cover it nearly as elegantly as one. I'll put the timeline of events in the description below if you want to better understand what this time period was like and how important it was, but unfortunately I'm not going to cover all the landmark victories that occurred. Needless to say, the time period in which Amelia grew up was home to some of the most prominent feminist movements in the United Kingdom. It's very incredibly unlikely that she wasn't in some way affected by this, especially when she got a higher education and is seen to directly challenge stereotypes, both in her flashback episode and in current day. In fact, I can prove that Amelia was very much affected by both the time period she grew up in and their movements, which will give us the explanation to the statement that I made in the video title.
It was easier when I thought the conductor was some heartless robot thing. But now I know she's a person named Amelia. And she's running away from the changes in her life. Because she's afraid. Like me.
Going back to the first scene that we see her and Alrick in, she's seen tinkering with a crystal radio. When handing their papers back, her teacher scolds her for playing with it and calling it a toy, being dismissive of the fact that she's taking a healthy interest in advanced technology for her age and boiling it down to simply being a toy. Knowing how deep Infinity Train gets with its problems and subject material, this was probably a very light gesture to let us know that her interests are not being taken seriously and dismissed simply because of her gender, especially when in direct comparison to the praise of her male colleague who just so happens to be her supportive romantic interest. She can also be seen rebelling against gender norms in her clothing when she's an adult, which was a very common way that women in the feminist movement used to rebel against the system and common gendered stereotypes. Though I'm sure that this is well-known information for most of you, as you've probably been familiarized with the flappers of the 1920s feminist movement in the United States. In the 1970s, it became common for women to dress androgynously and wear things like bell-bottom pants and jumpsuits. This was to signify that women could choose who they wanted to be and could wear whatever they wanted, even if pants were still more or less viewed as attire that men more commonly wore. Comparing Amelia's outfit from when she was an adult to that of a typical 1970s woman, you can very clearly see the resemblance, most easily seen with the bell-bottoms and her tucking her long-sleeved shirt into her pants. Amelia also graduated from university with an unspecified degree in engineering in 1976, which was only 1 year after the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975, and in the same year that the Equal Opportunities Commission began to oversee both the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act. This means that Amelia was most certainly subjected to intense discrimination because from a very young age she refused to fit the traditional female mold. Engineering especially was considered to be a male-exclusive profession that was out of the reach of most women, and is still a male-dominated area of work even in modern times. it likely would have been extremely difficult for her to even get into engineering school, let alone dealing with the discrimination and bigotry from her male peers, which was legal at the time that she was attending school. Even though protections were recently put into place to prevent her from experiencing things full blast after she graduated and began looking for a lifetime career, it took a while for them to actually be enforced and put into place. And as we all know, laws don't stop people from being discriminatory and bigoted, especially if they're in a position of power and influence like most employers are. They just find an excuse or a loophole as to why they're acting how they are, and they can usually get away with it without stating their actual reason. It still happens today, so it most certainly happened even more back then, especially with laws having only been newly implemented and controversial at the time. In the 1970s, it was heavily believed that a woman's place belonged primarily in the household, whether that be with housework or taking care of children. Even in this time period, it was considered to be a woman's natural destiny to pursue future strictly in motherhood rather than the future that was self-governed. Children and the subject of children are actually incredibly important to Amelia's arc for more than one reason, one which is incredibly blatant, and the other that is a very clear yet subtle addition to Book 3. More on those later, but there's more that we need to talk about first regarding 1970s activism. For Amelia, it would have been impossible for her to do what she was doing without help. There were a lot of laws against women doing anything without the signed support of a man, including property ownership and even being out at places such as bars without a man past a certain time during the night. If that sounds ridiculous, it's because it is. During this time period as well, only 1/4 of the college population was made up of women. This was still during a time where it was believed that because women were destined to grow up to only be mothers, they didn't need comprehensive education that would enable them to pursue careers. If you were a woman growing up in this time period and didn't want kids or wanted a self-sustainable job to support you without financial support from a husband, you would still need a man in order to literally give you permission to do that in writing. If it wasn't your husband giving you permission with his signature, it was your father or other prominent male figures in your life. If you didn't have one of those, or had one that believed a woman's destiny was predetermined, you were basically SOL. And this, my friends, is why Alrick was so important to Amelia and why she felt as though she had no life without him. Now, before I get into this, I'm not saying that Amelia only loved Alrick for what he enabled her to do. I do think that his support was part of why she loved him, but I don't think that she loved him only because of the freedom that he could provide her with. It's very clear that they had a very loving and healthy relationship just from the flashbacks, but it is important to point out when analyzing her downfall. She probably felt as though Alrick was one in a million, and she was never going to find anyone else who was going to be as supportive of her. You can tell by how Alrick sticks up for her and pranks their teacher that he's supportive of Amelia's irregular interests. He even goes to university with her and they graduate together. And when Amelia proposes to him, flipping gendered stereotypes on their head, Alrick is overjoyed to the point of tears. Had he been bothered by her not being the typical woman, I could guarantee to you that that wouldn't be his reaction to a woman proposing to him. This is all to say that Alrick Timmons was probably one of the best feminist allies during that time period and didn't actively work to limit his fiancée. You bet your butt that he would let Amelia do what she wanted to do, and he would do the best that he could to help support her. They kind of seem like that one couple that would show up to events wearing t-shirts in support of their partner or something, and I love that for them. If Amelia didn't have support, especially from a male figure, it would have been near impossible for her to survive on her own. She would likely need to resort to settling down and starting a family, and I very much doubt that she would be happy with her life if that were the case. So, it kind of makes sense that when Alrick died, she didn't see her life continuing in a way that made her want to live. In her eyes, the only change that would happen in her life would be negative. She probably thought due to her past experiences that no one else like Alrick would ever come into her life. Not to mention the social ostracization that she probably would have experienced by working in engineering and not having children at her age. Needless to say, I don't really think she had a whole lot of people in her corner. Even before the funeral began, there were only 4 people that came to offer support and check on her. This probably had her feeling incredibly alone and helpless and like her life was over. Even going through her memories and pausing the episode to see the finer details of some of them, Alrick was the only person that she was ever with. There's no visuals of any other people, not even her parents. But Alrick was always there since she was very little. She also likely didn't have the support of her parents if they were traditional, which is why her tape in general just has a lot of static. For those of you who don't know what the static and the tape means, it's basically what happens to the person's memories when they either purposely incorrectly recall what truly happened to cope, or when they keep the memory at a distance because it's just too painful. Amelia has a lot of these static-covered moments, and it's likely that a lot of them involved unaccepting parents or negative interactions involving discriminatory and misogynistic behavior. I do think as well that the only reason she was headed to their old university was to end her life in one of the places that she had fond memories of. Really, what other reason would she have had to head to the top of a tall building in the middle of the night with no one around for? The train knew, and that's why it appeared there to intervene and stop her. Although, this needed to be hinted at rather than blatantly and obviously stated for, reasons being that it's marketed towards a certain age group. You can only really get so much past the executives before they tell you to stop. But if you remember at the end of book 1, Amelia did kind of state that she didn't want to live without Alrick.
You can't keep trying to recreate your old life. You have to learn how to live in this one.
Don't you get it? I don't want a life without Ulrich.
I'm sure that these details were intentional since background details in Infinity Train, as I mentioned earlier, are one of its strong points. I mean, you can literally see the steward in the background of scenes a lot of the time before they officially appear. You could have also predicted that Hazel was somehow related to Amelia because of the turtle imagery, as well as the lighthearted comment that she made about ballroom dancing.
Couples do ballroom as a fun bonding activity.
Yeah, I guess so.
Generally, small details like this are hardly ever just a coincidence with this show, and it always keeps you thinking on which are put in intentionally as foreshadowing. If the only way she could possibly see herself being happy was when Alrick was alive, her coming to the conclusion that she either needed to die or bring him back to life is one that sadly makes a lot of sense. It's why she went so far into committing and refusing to move on despite how many years of her life she ended up wasting. And I do think that somewhere along the way, it became more and more desperate until she started actively harming those who were innocent in order to achieve her goal. Amelia isn't exactly the most caring and nurturing person at present, and I do feel like this is because of how the world treated her. She was shown to be very kind and loving to Alrick, and I think him dying was the final straw for her. She also had no intentions of leaving the train, since she seems to both like and thrive the train environment. Her goal was never to bring Alrick back and then leave with him to go back to England, it was always to bring Alrick back and then live there with him. That says a lot about how much she actually valued her life that she had before she left, if the only thing keeping her there was a singular person. This also ties into why she doesn't like children. Amelia liking children is essentially one of her most mentioned characteristics. In book 1, she's very aggravated by Tulip's interference and calls her a little monster, which seems to be a child-oriented insult.
You got your exit. What are you still doing on the train, you little monster?
In book 3, this is highlighted even more by her literally stating that she hates children and insulting Simon by calling him a child in a derogatory way.
Oh, I hate children. Have you ever considered that you've been wrong? Ha, of course not! You're a child. Say it again!
When Hazel asks her to allow her to travel with her, Amelia very harshly tells her that she can accompany her as long as she knows that she's not her caretaker. She only agrees once Hazel affirms that she can and will take care of herself.
I want to go with you.
Well, you're certainly coming with me, but I'm not on a road trip. What I'm doing here is my job. I'm an inventor, an engineer, a snappy dresser, but I am not your caretaker.
Just in general, you can tell that being around children is very, very high on her list of dislikes. And I don't think that she actually hates children, I think it's more along the lines of her hating what they represent. Back when she was on Earth, she probably viewed children as the main source of her oppression. This is supported by the fact that she immediately seems concerned that she's going to be slowed down and limited by Hazel traveling with her and that she would need to care for her, automatically viewing a child as a negative thing instead of a positive or neutral thing. This is probably because women were and still are viewed as caretakers strictly because they can bear children. And I do think that because that was the justification, she probably has some redirected and misguided anger towards them, even if she herself isn't really aware of that. Now, this isn't to say that she should be comfortable with the idea of being a mother and that she's wrong for not wanting to be one, because I don't think she was meant to be one. And this doesn't mean that she isn't capable or that she isn't a good person, it just means that it isn't for her and her happiness. Not every woman wants children, and they have the right not to have them. Even if Amelia's hatred and discomfort is misdirected, it doesn't mean that she would enjoy being a mother if she sorted those issues out and redirected her anger and frustration to the proper places. And this is where the symbolic nature of Hazel comes in. Hazel is one of Amelia's failed experiments that she made trying to bring Alrick back to life. She has his hair color and is wearing his school clothes, but also has Amelia's starting train number and some of her and Alrick's memories. This implies that she's technically a mixture of both Alrick and Amelia, making them her mom and dad on a very basic level. While Amelia is Hazel's creator and didn't have her naturally, she still is technically her mother, and I'm sure that knowing Hazel, she will view her as such. This is also why we had that whole scene in book 3 where Grace asked who Hazel's parents were and she got upset and ran to Tuba for comfort.
I don't know.
You don't know? What about your dad?
He was... I don't know!
This detail was intentional. Hazel technically is a child who was made on accident and is now effectively being forced into Amelia's life, which was probably one of Amelia's biggest fears living in 1970 and 1980s England as a woman. This isn't Hazel's fault, and Amelia is justified to be upset about it, but both of them are victims of the system. In this case, the system is the train, but you get what I'm saying here. The ending to Amelia's arc would likely not be one of her accepting motherhood, but of her easing up on how she treats and views children. Because the thing not a lot of people realize is that it's okay to dislike children, but what isn't okay is acting on that dislike or hatred. They deserve to be treated with respect and compassion, as well as be taken seriously. Whenever I see adults that are proudly professing that they hate children, that's usually accompanied by a bunch of gross opinions that are tangentially related, and that type of behavior isn't okay. Just say that having children isn't something that you want for yourself and go on about your day. It really isn't that hard, I promise. I do think that's something that Amelia would learn to do while traveling with Hazel rather than taking on a maternal role. Because, as I mentioned, I don't really think that motherhood is something she would ever enjoy. However, I do think that in order for her to get off of the train, she needs to get over Alrick. And the only way to fully do that is to resolve her feelings surrounding how she was treated before boarding the train. Basically, she needs to feel that life off of the train without Alrick is worth living. While she says in book 3 that she does eventually want to get off of the train, I do think that there will be some apprehension if that time ever does come for her. Overall, she has spent at least half of her life on the train at this point, probably more. The thing about the train is that there isn't anyone to tell her no. There's no one to stop her from doing what she wants to do or telling her that she's silly for wanting more for herself than what society deems she's worth having. While she did want to bring Alrick back, her goal was never to leave the train and return to their previous lives. Her goal was to bring him back and then live the rest of their lives on the train in a controlled environment of her creation. Ironically, her ideologies weren't that far off from both Grace and Simon's. She likes the train more than she lets on, or at least she did at one point. She's thriving in the train environment, and she literally made a robot, reprogrammed a cannon that transforms things, and has control of technology that's far more advanced than anything she had seen prior in her engineering career. Her passion was engorged, and she could finally live to what she believed was her full potential. Why would she want to leave if the world that she would be returning to treated her as less? It's something that she has to get over and decide if she's willing to take that risk in order to leave. If she thinks that it isn't and things are as bleak as they were when she lived there, her number is never going to reach 0. Hazel is symbolic of a life that she was afraid of living, and so resolving her issues with her is what will ultimately enable her to leave the train. Unfortunately though, this is going to be at Hazel's expense. Children should not need to help adults sort out their problems, but that is often what ends up happening to kids who have parents who either didn't want them, were pressured or forced by society into having them, or were not emotionally mature enough to have them. The kids in these situations end up suffering just as much or more than the adults, and unfortunately, this is something that's still very common today. Amelia's story is, on a very basic level, a story about feminism, but it isn't a feel-good story that romanticizes the women's rights movement into this inspiring story of all like history classes often do. While the actions of activists are something that is inspiring like most social justice movements and figures are, we lose the horror and reality behind the reasons why these movements were being done in the first place. And we will continue to do so if all of our media boils it down to stories of inspiration. While it's also important to celebrate how far we've come, it's also important to acknowledge and think back on what it took us to get here, and to look back on those who suffered getting us the change that we needed, and those who may have not made it. And while I do think that Amelia's story itself is more melancholy than it is anything else, she is a fantastic character that breaks the traditional mold. Not only is she an older woman who is interested in technology, but she's incredibly skilled in what she does. She was someone who came from the 1980s with an Apple II computer being some of the most advanced technology that she'd ever worked on or seen, to being in control of a train with extraterrestrial levels of advancement. It's pretty amazing that she was able to figure out as much as she could, as well as design her own gadgets to help her navigate the train. Her technology is probably even still leagues ahead of what we have today, making her possibly one of the most well-versed humans in robotics and engineering. She's one of the only women characters past her 50s that isn't a mother or nurturing type that becomes an adoptive mother, and that makes her special in her own right. Usually, when you see a woman who's in or above her 40s, her character basically boils down to just mom character to the protagonist. And while there's absolutely nothing wrong at all with being a mother, and I do love me a good mom archetype, I do think we need more media that normalizes women not having kids. I do think that when it comes to this, Amelia does help break that mold a little bit. Not to mention, she could probably literally bench press a full-grown man with little to no effort. And she does already sort of do this when she threatens to beat Simon up for being insufferable. And she's in her late 60s. You can't tell me that that isn't at least a tiny bit impressive. When I look at her, I see a strong and extremely intelligent woman who, through all adversity and hardships, she survived. And even though everyone was telling her that she couldn't do things, she still did them anyways. She may have been flawed and went through some questionable lengths to get there, but she's still pretty damn inspiring for what she had managed to do. And the fact that she's flawed and has a messy past makes her even better in my opinion. She got a degree in engineering in 1976 and went to school while it was still legal for her to be discriminated against. She seemed to be successful at her job while she was on Earth, even though she was working in a male-dominated field. She proposed to her husband, refusing to let gender roles in any way dominate her relationship, despite how others around them may feel about it. Once thrown into an unfamiliar situation, not only did she very quickly adapt, but she thrived and outsmarted the conductor, even now as an older woman. You can't tell me that she isn't a fantastic example of a strong female character, especially now that she's about to go through a redemption arc that is likely to test her harder than she has been in the past. I feel like she'll only end up getting even more compelling in Book 4, where we'll get even more context to her life before the train and the dynamics of her and Alrick's relationship. This story is a realistic one, and is one that I believe can only have a bittersweet ending at this point. It's a story about a woman who grew up in a time period with very clear gender roles that were expected and forced in some cases. She faced struggles and held her head high, but did so because she had a very supportive partner by her side. When Alrick died, she couldn't imagine living without him or his support because she felt that she had no one else, and so she boarded the train. She wasn't willing to accept the change that came with his death and only thought that things would change for the worst. She believed that she was alone and that life wasn't worth living without Alrick, and she still does, which is why she's still trapped. She's now thriving on the train, proving that women, and especially older women, can do things that their male counterparts can do just as good or if not even better. The system failed her. On a very fundamental level, that's what Infinity Train as a show is about. It's about how a flawed or purposely rigged system controls, changes, and ruins lives by enforcing its own code of morals that's rigged in another's favor. The system failed Tulip when her parents got divorced and didn't have the time to give her the attention and care that she needed to cope with the situation. The system failed Jesse when bullies were allowed to peer pressure him into doing things that he didn't want to do. It failed Lake when it told her that she wasn't allowed to have an identity outside of a predetermined one and tried to kill her for it. It failed Grace and Simon when they created a cult based off of bigotry and hatred that resulted in one of their deaths, because said cult was allowed to be created and no one was there to stop, comfort, or correct and teach teach them. And last but not least, the system failed Amelia when she believed that death was the only solution to her problems. Because the world that she was currently living in was one that she was miserable and felt hopeless in. The train kidnaps people, forces them to work on their problems, and deems what is and isn't good for the person without their input. And if you don't follow the rules or do what it deems is best for you, it tries and sometimes succeeds in killing while trapping you. The train itself is meant to represent how the real world and its structure is broken to the point of people dying and causing others to suffer needlessly because of what it deems is the correct way. So, while Amelia's full story is unspoken and may unfortunately remain that way, the message itself is clear. And maybe that's getting a bit deep for an animated show about a never-ending train with talking cats and dogs, but that's what I get out of it. I do have more opinions and analysis regarding the show, of course, but they kind of go outside the scope of this video. If you want to see more of those analysis videos in the future, why not subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of when I upload. Special thank you to my top tier patrons: Ambrose Rothwood, Rosie Knightley, Jeffy Games, Brandon Nunes, The Lovely Ghosty, Kira Feek, Sadin Suzuki, Lee Taylor, and Zachary Ansley. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.